Silent stones hold stories that contradict our history books. We are about to explore 30 abandoned capitals whose ruins actively challenge everything we think we know about why societies fall. By the end, you will see the entire narrative of human civilization in a startling new light. What force could make a people walk away from a city carved into cliffs or abandon a metropolis of 20,000? The answers are never simple, and they force us to ask a deeper question. What does the endurance of a civilization truly depend upon? The idea of a civilization's end is usually wrapped in dramatic imagery. We see fire, conquest, and a final, decisive silence, but history is rarely that cinematic. To understand these silent capitals, we must first dismantle our own assumptions about what collapse actually means. It is not a single event you can point to on a calendar. Instead, think of it as a process, a gradual dimming of a complex social light. The scholar Joseph Tainter offers a powerful lens, suggesting that societies are problem-solving organizations that grow increasingly complex. They build bureaucracies, armies, and monumental projects to address challenges, but there comes a point of diminishing returns where the energy and resources needed to maintain that towering complexity simply outweigh the benefits. The system becomes too costly to sustain. This is why the ruins we will explore so often lack the clear scars of a singular disaster. You will not always find a layer of ash from a volcano or evidence of a sack. You find a subtle mosaic, a story told in shifting pollen grains that indicate drought, in trade goods that stopped arriving, in grand buildings that were slowly, carefully taken apart for their stone. What looks like abandonment from a distance is often, upon closer inspection, a story of transformation. A people did not vanish, they changed, they adapted, sometimes by walking away from a capital that had become an unsustainable burden. This crucial shift in perspective, from hunting for a single moment of catastrophe to reading a long, slow process of change, is the key that will unlock the true mysteries held by these 30 places. Their stones challenge us to see not an end but a transition. This list demands a very specific kind of ghost. Our journey is not through every forgotten town, but to the abandoned nerve centers of vanished worlds. To earn a place among these 30, a site must have been the undeniable capital of its time, a place of concentrated power, ceremony, and governance. Its empty streets must whisper a riddle that standard explanations cannot solve. War, famine, or illness often play a role, but here they are never the whole story. The true mystery lies in the mismatch, the evidence that does not fit. We selected these sites based on the grandeur they achieved, the sophistication etched into their remaining walls, and the sheer weight of the question mark hanging over their silent plazas. Each one is a case file in an unsolved historical investigation, and we open the first file in a place that shattered a continent's forgotten narrative. A city of stone rises from the African savanna, a silent testament to a kingdom of immense wealth. Great Zimbabwe, the first capital on our journey, is a masterpiece of engineering built entirely without mortar. Its curved walls, some over 30 feet high, were assembled from precisely cut granite blocks, fitting together so perfectly they have withstood the centuries through skill alone. This was the heart of a kingdom that, from the 11th to the 15th centuries, commanded a vast network of gold and ivory trade stretching to the coasts of the Indian Ocean. The scale of its ruins speaks of concentrated power, of a society sophisticated enough to organize such a grand construction and manage commerce across continents. For a long time, its very existence was a mystery that outside observers refused to solve correctly, with some claiming it must have been built by foreigners, by anyone but the local Shona people. Modern archaeology has soundly rejected those ideas, confirming Great Zimbabwe as a purely indigenous African achievement. This makes its later story all the more compelling. When we look for its end, we find no signs of a dramatic fall. There is no layer of ash, no evidence of conflict within its walls. The city seems to have been gradually, peacefully left behind. So what happened? The leading theory paints a picture of slow strain. A growing population may have led to overgrazing, subtly degrading the land that supported the city. Political power could have fragmented, shifting to newer centers. Most crucially, the trade routes that were its lifeblood may have changed, redirecting the flow of wealth and influence elsewhere. The decline was likely a combination of these quiet pressures, a slow leak rather than a burst dam. This is why Great Zimbabwe stands as a foundational example for our entire list. Its story challenges the hunt for a single villain, and instead asks us to listen for the faint, overlapping echoes of environmental, economic, and social change. The stones do not tell a tale of conquest, but of a civilization making a different choice, walking away from a capital that could no longer sustain its grandeur. The scale of Great Zimbabwe was monumental, but its population was dwarfed by our next capital. Cahokia was a true metropolis, a bustling city of up to 20,000 people that rose from the fertile floodplains of the Mississippi River over 1,000 years ago. This was not a collection of villages, it was a carefully planned urban center, the largest of its kind north of Mexico. Its skyline was defined not by stone, but by earth, shaped by human hands into enormous ceremonial mounds. The grandest of these, Monk's Mound, is a colossal earthen pyramid containing over 22 million cubic feet of soil, a construction project that would have required generations of coordinated labor. Surrounding it was a vast central plaza, a space for gatherings and rituals that was larger than 35 football fields. This was a place of clear social order, with evidence of skilled artisans, powerful leaders, and long-distance trade networks. Cahokia was the undeniable capital of a complex society, a Mississippi Valley civilization at its zenith. Then, by the 13th century, the city began to empty. The question is not just why people left, but why they never returned to a site of such obvious strategic and spiritual power. Environmental strain is part of the story. Tree ring data suggests periods of heavy flooding followed by severe drought, a 1-2 punch that would have devastated the maize-based agriculture feeding the massive population. The very land that gave them life may have turned against them. But archaeology hints at something more. In a district now called the Ramey Field, researchers found what appears to be evidence of a sudden, violent event, with signs of conflict that stand out in the otherwise peaceful archaeological record. More subtly, there are clues of a possible ideological shift. The Grand Wood Henge, a circle of massive wooden posts used to mark celestial events, was rebuilt several times, and then eventually the practice stopped. This suggests the unifying cosmological beliefs that helped hold this vast society together may have begun to fracture. Cahokia's story is a profound echo of Great Zimbabwe's, but on an even grander scale. It shows us that the challenges of sustaining a colossal urban center, of balancing people with their environment and maintaining a shared social contract, were universal human trials. Its silent mounds remind us that even the most impressive capitals are held together by a fragile, invisible web of belief, resources, and collective will. Angkor redefines what a city can be. While Cahokia mastered earth, the Khmer Empire mastered water, transforming a challenging landscape into the engine of its power. The iconic temple of Angkor Wat, breathtaking as it is, was just the spiritual heart of something far greater. Angkor was a hydraulic metropolis, a city built not just of stone, but of liquid ambition. Its lifeblood was a vast, intricate network of canals, massive reservoirs called barrays, and intricate moats, all designed to capture, store, and redistribute the torrential monsoon rains. This system turned seasonal deluge into a year-round resource, fueling the rice paddies that fed a population which may have exceeded 1 million people. For centuries, this liquid engineering was the foundation of the Khmer Empire's dominance across Southeast Asia. Its slow fading, beginning in the 15th century, presents a puzzle of a different kind. This was not a rapid evacuation, but a centuries-long retreat, a capital gently releasing its grip as the jungle patiently reclaimed its streets. For a long time, the sheer scale of this retreat was misunderstood. Modern technology, specifically LiDAR, which uses lasers to see through dense forest canopy, has revealed the shocking truth. The Greater Angkor area was a low-density urban sprawl covering nearly 1,000 square miles, a vast landscape of homes, ponds, and roads all integrated into that water grid. This discovery changes the entire question. It suggests a society of immense population, one that pushed its brilliant infrastructure to the absolute limit. So what tipped the balance? The leading theory is a cascade of interconnected strains. That magnificent water network, while a feat of engineering, was also incredibly fragile. It required constant, meticulous maintenance. A series of prolonged droughts, evidenced by tree ring studies, would have crippled the system, causing crop failures and social unrest. At the same time, the empire's religious and political focus may have been shifting toward coastal trade centers, drawing power and resources away from the inland capital. Angkor's story is a profound lesson in the vulnerability of complexity. It represents a society that grew so sophisticated, so dependent on its own technological masterpiece, that when the environment shifted and maintenance became impossible, the entire system became a liability. The jungle did not conquer a dying city. It simply enveloped a capital that its people had already, gradually, decided they could no longer sustain. High on the sun-baked cliffs of the Colorado Plateau, an entire society turned its back on the sky. At places like Mesa Verde, the ancestral Pueblones did not just build towns, they sculpted them into the very rock, creating multi-story apartment complexes tucked into vast, natural canyon alcoves. These cliff dwellings were marvels of adaptation, with rooms of precisely fitted sandstone blocks, circular ceremonial kivas dug into the floor, and ingenious hand and toe-hold trails connecting them to the world above. They represent a pinnacle of architectural ingenuity in a demanding landscape. And then, within a generation or two around the end of the 13th century, the people walked away. They placed closure stones in doorways as if sealing a chapter and departed. This was not a slow fade, but a relatively rapid, coordinated exodus from an entire region. The defensible nature of these homes makes the departure all the more puzzling. In a time of uncertainty, why leave such secure, painstakingly built fortresses? The evidence points to a powerful environmental push. Tree ring records reveal a punishing period known as the Great Drought, a 24-year stretch of arid conditions that would have withered the corn, beans, and squash grown on the mesa tops. Yet many archaeologists argue that drought alone is an incomplete answer. These were a resilient people who had weathered dry spells before. The key may lie in what the drought set in motion. As resources dwindled, competition and social tensions likely intensified. The very act of retreating to defensive cliff dwellings might signal a time of increased conflict, a fracturing of the social bonds that held communities together. Furthermore, there is compelling evidence of a powerful cultural pull. To the south, in areas like the Rio Grande Valley, other Pueblo communities were thriving and consolidating. This suggests a possible spiritual or social imperative, a collective decision to migrate and reunite with related groups, seeking not just survival, but a renewal of cultural and religious life. Mesa Verde, therefore, challenges us most profoundly on the definition of collapse. The empty cliff houses are not a tomb, but a doorway. They signify a society that made a conscious, difficult choice to abandon a magnificent, but perhaps spiritually or socially unsustainable, home in pursuit of a different future. Their story reframes abandonment not as a failure, but as a strategic adaptation, a profound act of resilience written in empty stone rooms and carefully sealed doors. The architectural genius of the ancestral Pueblones was born from adapting to a specific, vertical landscape. But what happens when a civilization designs its entire world from scratch with a precision that feels eerily modern? In the plains of modern-day Pakistan, the ruins of Mohenjo-Daro provide an answer. This was not a city that grew organically over centuries. It was a master plan executed in baked brick. Walking its streets over 3,500 years ago, you would have seen a marvel of early urban engineering. The main avenues ran straight north-south and east-west in a near-perfect grid, with smaller lanes branching off to residential blocks. Almost every house had its own bathing area and a dedicated waste disposal system, with sophisticated drains running beneath the streets and out of the city. The bricks themselves were standardized, following a consistent ratio, as if produced by a society that valued order above all else. This incredible uniformity, the lack of obvious palaces or gigantic temples, suggests a social structure unlike the towering hierarchies of Egypt or Mesopotamia. Power here seems to have been distributed, focused on civic administration and collective well-being rather than the glorification of a single ruler. This makes the city's later silence even more perplexing. When archaeologists first uncovered Mohenjo-Daro, they expected to find the classic signs of a dramatic fall, perhaps evidence of a conquest or a catastrophic rebellion. They found nothing of the sort. There are no grand palaces burned to the ground, no caches of weapons, no mass memorial sites indicating a sudden, violent end. The city appears to have been simply left. So what untied the knot of this meticulously planned society? The leading theories point not to a human enemy, but to an environmental one that slowly unraveled the city's foundations. The lifeblood of Mohenjo-Daro was the Great Indus River. Research suggests its course may have shifted dramatically over time, moving away from the city and its surrounding farmlands. Imagine the slow disaster season after season, as the canals that fed the fields ran dry and the vital silt deposits that renewed the soil failed to arrive. Compounding this was a broader climatic shift. Studies of ancient ocean sediments and cave formations indicate that the monsoon winds that brought crucial rain to the region began to weaken around this time. The double blow of a wandering river and a fading monsoon would have crippled the agricultural surplus that supported such a large, non-farming urban population. The result was not a sudden apocalypse but a gradual dissolution. People did not vanish, they likely made a pragmatic choice. Over generations, they dispersed from the great, planned capital into smaller, more sustainable villages, returning to a simpler way of life closer to the land. Mohenjo-Daro challenges our obsession with dramatic collapse by presenting a powerful alternative to urbanization. It shows a civilization not falling, but deliberately downsizing, choosing resilience and continuity over maintaining an urban ideal that the environment could no longer support. The order of Mohenjo-Daro feels almost peaceful, a quiet surrender to a changing world. But when we travel to the high plateau of Anatolia, the story shifts from a gradual retreat to a deliberate, puzzling silence. Hattusa, the capital of the mighty Hittite Empire, was a fortress city designed to project unshakable power. Its double walls, some sections over 20 feet thick, snaked across the landscape. Grand temples to storm gods and sun goddesses anchored its ceremonial core, and its gateways were guarded by colossal stone sphinxes and lions, their silent stares meant to intimidate any approaching enemy. This was the nerve center of an empire that rivaled ancient Egypt, a superpower of the Bronze Age that commanded through treaties, diplomacy, and military might. Then, around 1200 BCE, in the turbulent era historians call the Late Bronze Age collapse, Hattusa was largely abandoned. The mystery here is not a lack of potential culprits, but a mismatch between the expected story and the evidence left behind. The wider Mediterranean world was in chaos, with empires crumbling, trade routes disintegrating, and mysterious groups often called the Sea Peoples cited as agents of destruction. It would be easy to picture Hattusa falling in flames to such an invasion. Yet, the stones of the city itself tell a different, more thoughtful tale. Archaeologists have found that many of the city's most valuable portable treasures, from official seals to precious metals, were removed. The grand gates were not burned or shattered, but left standing. There is no widespread layer of ash, no clear evidence of a violent, house-to-house battle that would mark a catastrophic sack. Instead, the scene suggests a planned, orderly evacuation. So what prompted the Hittite leadership to walk away from their impregnable capital? The leading theory points inward to fractures within the empire itself. Maintaining such a vast, multi-ethnic domain required immense resources and a stable, centralized authority. Evidence suggests the royal line may have been plagued by dynastic strife, succession disputes that weakened the core from the top down. At the same time, the economic foundations were shaking. The collapse of international trade networks would have choked off vital supplies of tin for bronze and luxury goods for the elite, eroding both military power and political legitimacy. Faced with these internal crises, the rulers of Hattusa may have made a cold calculation. The formidable walls were no longer a defense against an external enemy, but a trap, a symbol of a central authority that could no longer feed its people or command their loyalty. The orderly evacuation, then, looks less like a retreat and more like a strategic relocation of the state's remaining wealth and administrative core to a safer, more sustainable location, even if that meant the grand capital itself became a hollow shell. Hattusa's fate is a crucial piece of the larger puzzle. It complicates the dramatic narrative of a single, violent wave of destruction sweeping the Bronze Age world. Instead, it points to a mosaic of crises, where internal political and economic fragility could render even the most formidable fortress obsolete, prompting its guardians to simply lock the gates and walk away into an uncertain future. The silence of Hattusa was a calculated decision, a strategic withdrawal from a fortress, but in the dense rainforests of the Americas, another capital fell silent for reasons that seemed to weave the sky itself into its downfall. Tikal was a city built to touch the heavens. Its iconic temples, like Temple 4, rise over 200 feet above the jungle floor, stone mountains erected to bring kings closer to the gods. For centuries, this was a powerhouse of Maya civilization, a city-state whose influence stretched across the region, its history meticulously carved into stone monuments called stelae. These records give us names, dates, and grand claims of victories, creating a narrative of divine kings who served as the crucial link between the people and the cosmos. The story they tell makes the city's later quiet not just a mystery, but a profound spiritual rupture. The traditional explanation for the Maya downturn around the 9th century often centers on a single villain, drought. And the evidence is compelling. Sediment cores from lakes near Tikal show a clear pattern of increasingly arid conditions during the city's final centuries. A society dependent on seasonal rains for its reservoirs and maize crops would have been pushed to the brink. Yet, if drought were the sole answer, we would expect to see a uniform pattern of abandonment across the entire Maya world. Instead, we see a patchwork. Some cities fell early, others persisted for generations. This tells us the environmental stress was a powerful trigger, but not the only detonator. The drought did not destroy Tikal so much as expose and amplify every hidden weakness in its foundation. the true unraveling happened within the social and political fabric. The stelae themselves, those records of royal glory, begin to hint at a world coming apart. They speak of intensifying warfare, not just against distant enemies, but in devastating conflicts between neighboring Maya city-states, former allies locked in a cycle of raid and retaliation that drained resources and shattered stability. This constant state of conflict would have made trade difficult, diverted labor from farming to defense, and eroded the trust that held the regional network together. Furthermore, the very ideology of the state was under siege. The king's power was divine, based on his unique ability to commune with gods and ensure the rains came, the sun rose, and the crops grew. When prolonged drought struck despite the king's rituals and sacrifices, a crisis of faith was inevitable. If the divine king could no longer bring the rains, what was his purpose? The contract between ruler and ruled, a contract written in spiritual terms, began to dissolve. Tikal's story, therefore, is a masterclass in systemic collapse. It was not one system failing, but multiple interconnected systems failing in a devastating cascade. Environmental stress strained the agricultural base. This economic strain fueled political instability and warfare. The warfare further crippled the economy and, crucially, undermined the religious legitimacy that was the bedrock of political power. Each problem magnified the others, creating a feedback loop from which the complex society could not recover. People did not abandon Tikal in a single day. They likely dispersed gradually, moving away from the grand plazas and silent temples to smaller, more sustainable communities, perhaps turning their backs on the idea of the god-king altogether. The rainforest did not conquer Tikal. It simply waited patiently for the intricate web of belief, power, and ecology that built the city to finally tear itself apart. The Maya collapse was a slow, systemic unraveling of belief and ecology. Yet across the world, another civilization built its capital not for gods, but for commerce, carving its fortune directly from the cliffs. Petra is a monument to the power of water in a land of thirst. The Nabatean Arabs did not merely settle a desert valley, they conquered its aridity with breathtaking ingenuity. They engineered an entire hidden watershed, channeling scarce rainfall through a complex system of dams, cisterns, and ceramic pipes that could hold millions of gallons. This mastery of desert hydrology turned a barren gorge into a lush, defensible oasis, the perfect nerve center for a commercial empire. Petra's wealth was not grown from the earth but carried on the backs of camels. It sat at the crucial crossroads of the incense trade, where routes carrying frankincense and myrrh from southern Arabia converged on their way to the Mediterranean world. The city's famous treasury, that iconic facade carved into rose-red rock, was less a palace and more a monumental billboard, a display of unimaginable wealth designed to awe the merchants and diplomats who arrived after a long desert journey. Petra's genius was logistical, turning a geographic bottleneck into a global marketplace. This makes its centuries-long fade into silence a particularly clear case study in economic vulnerability. The conventional turning point is the Roman annexation in 106 CE. While this brought Petra under the umbrella of the Roman Empire, it did not immediately destroy the city. In fact, it initially brought a new wave of Roman-style construction. The true erosion was more subtle and far more decisive. As Rome consolidated its power, it began to shift the flow of goods. The dangerous, expensive overland caravan routes which Petra taxed and protected were increasingly bypassed by safer, cheaper sea lanes through the Red Sea. Why trek across a desert when a ship could carry more cargo with less risk? Slowly, inexorably, Petra's reason for being, its economic lifeblood, began to drain away. The city became a historical detour rather than a destination. Then, in 363 CE, a massive earthquake struck. For any city, this would be a catastrophe. For Petra, it was a targeted blow to its very soul. The quake shattered the meticulous water management system, the engineered miracle that made large-scale life in the desert possible. With trade already diminished, the resources and coordinated labor needed to repair the fractured dams and channels were likely no longer available. Petra's story powerfully challenges any single-cause theory of collapse. There was no invading army that sacked the treasury, no bloody revolt or sudden plague. Instead, we see a 1-2 punch of economic obsolescence and natural disaster. The first blow, the rerouting of world trade, made the city gradually less relevant. The second blow, the earthquake, made it physically unsustainable at its former grandeur. It is a tale of a capital that did not so much fall as become quietly obsolete, its magnificent stone facades standing as a beautiful, haunting reminder that a city built on the flow of commerce can only last as long as the routes continue to run through its gates. The story of Petra is one of economic arteries being rerouted by history, yet sometimes the blow is not slow but devastatingly swift. In southern India, the ruins of Vijayanagara are a landscape of shock. This was not a city that faded, it was a capital shattered in its prime. At its height in the 16th century, it was described by Portuguese and Persian travelers as rivaling Rome, a global metropolis of immense wealth, with bustling bazaars, grand temples, and an irrigation system that turned a rocky basin into a fertile paradise. Its scale is still staggering, a testament to the power of the Vijayanagara Empire. Then, in 1565, came the Battle of Talakota. A coalition of rival Deccan sultanates defeated the Vijayanagara armies, captured the king, and marched on the capital. What followed was systematic looting and occupation, a deliberate dismantling of a rival's heart. The city was sacked, its monuments defaced, and its population scattered. On the surface, this is the clearest story on our list, a classic military collapse. But the true mystery begins in the aftermath. With the army defeated and the capital occupied, why did the empire never truly recover? Why was a new central capital never re-established to rally the kingdom? The military defeat was the hammer blow, but it fell upon a structure that was already cracked. The empire's rapid inability to reconstitute itself points to deeper, hidden vulnerabilities that the battle merely exposed. This vast domain may have been suffering from administrative overextension, struggling to manage its far-flung territories from a single, magnificent center. Economic strains, perhaps from maintaining its colossal army and building projects, could have weakened its resilience. There may also have been simmering succession crises or factional disputes within the elite, eroding the unified command needed to respond to a catastrophe. The Battle of Talakota was the external shock, but the empire's failure to rise again was a symptom of profound internal weakness. Vijayanagara challenges us to look beyond the obvious villain. It shows that even the most spectacular military defeat is often not a cause, but a catalyst, the final stress that reveals how fragile the bonds of empire have already become. The splendid ruins stand not just as a memorial to a lost battle, but as a silent question about what was already lost within long before the first sword was drawn. The sheer stone of Vijayanagara was shattered by a decisive human conflict, but some capitals are brought low by a force far older and more indifferent than any army. On the arid north coast of Peru, the capital of the Chimu Empire, Chan Chan, presents a different kind of ruin. This was not a city of quarried rock, but of sun-dried earth. It was the largest adobe city the world has ever known, a sprawling metropolis of dust-colored walls that once housed perhaps 60,000 people. Its grandeur lay in its intricate design, a maze of 10 enormous walled compounds called ciudadelas, each a self-contained palace for the elite, complete with storerooms, ceremonial plazas, and labyrinthine corridors designed to confuse and awe visitors. This was the administrative heart of an empire that mastered the desert, using sophisticated canals to channel rivers from the Andes to their fields, creating an agricultural oasis in a landscape of profound dryness. Its conquest by the Inca Empire around 1470 CE is a clear historical fact, a classic tale of a rising power absorbing a rival. The real mystery begins after the battle was won. The Inca, master assimilators who often incorporated conquered peoples and their gods into their own system, made a curious choice here. They did not maintain Chan as a major provincial center. Instead, they stripped it of its most vital resource, its people. Skilled artisans, weavers, and metalworkers were forcibly relocated to the Inca capital of Cusco, a common practice to neuter a rival's cultural and economic base. But then, they seemingly allowed the city itself to fade. Why would a civilization renowned for its administrative genius choose not to fully utilize such an impressive, ready-made capital? The answer appears to be written in the very material from which Chan was built, and in the climate that surrounded it. Adobe, while excellent for temperature regulation in a desert, is profoundly vulnerable to water. And the north coast of Peru is periodically ravaged by El Niño events, where warm Pacific currents shift, triggering catastrophic rainfall and flooding in normally dry regions. The Chimu's hydraulic systems were brilliant, but they were designed for controlled irrigation, not for withstanding biblical-scale deluges. An archaeological look at Chan reveals repeated episodes of repair to walls and canals, evidence of a constant, exhausting battle against these climatic tantrums. For the Inca, inheriting Chan meant inheriting this relentless, unwinnable war. Their decision looks less like neglect and more like a cold, pragmatic assessment. Maintaining this vast adobe complex in a flood-prone zone required an unsustainable investment of labor and resources. It was easier and smarter to drain the city of its human talent and let the environment do the rest of the work. Chan's story, therefore, reframes our understanding of conquest. It shows that a superior military force does not always see value in the physical capital of the defeated. Sometimes the greatest threat to a city's survival isn't the army that conquers it, but the conqueror's clear-eyed calculation that the place itself is more of a liability than an asset. Its crumbling walls stand as a monument not just to Chimu ingenuity, but to the moment when even the world's greatest empire looked at a masterpiece and decided it was simply too costly to keep. Palmyra was a mirage made real, a city of marble and dust that existed because of a delicate balance between worlds. In the heart of the Syrian desert, this oasis did not merely survive, it thrived by becoming the indispensable middleman. Its genius was political as much as it was commercial. Straddling the volatile frontier between the Roman and Parthian empires, Palmyra mastered the art of neutrality and connection. Its merchants spoke many languages, its architecture fused Corinthian columns with Persian motifs, and its gods had both Semitic and Greco-Roman names. This cultural fluidity was its armor and its currency, allowing caravans laden with silk, spices, and incense to move safely between empires that were often at war. The city's wealth built a stunning urban landscape of grand colonnaded streets, sprawling temples, and distinctive tower tombs that rose from the sands. For a brief, brilliant moment under the leadership of Queen Zenobia, Palmyra even dared to flip the script, expanding its own power to challenge Rome directly. This ambition led to its famous and definitive military end. After a fierce rebellion, the Roman Emperor Aurelian recaptured the city in 273 CE, sacking it and taking Zenobia herself to Rome. On the surface, this is another story of a capital crushed by a superior army for the crime of defiance. But if that were the whole story, Palmyra's ruins would pose no real mystery. History is full of cities that were sacked and then rebuilt. The deeper question is why, after the dust settled and Rome reasserted control, Palmyra never regained its position as a great capital. The answer lies not in the violence of its fall, but in the quiet geopolitics that followed. Aurelian's victory was a lesson Rome would not forget. In the aftermath, imperial policy deliberately sought to break the pattern Palmyra represented. The Romans began to foster and secure alternative trade routes that bypassed the desert caravan network, routes that were easier to control and tax directly. The city's unique value as a neutral gateway, the very reason for its existence, was systematically engineered out of existence. Later, under Byzantine and then Islamic rule, major trade arteries continued to shift elsewhere. Palmyra was not destroyed a second time, it was simply made obsolete. Its magnificent colonnades, still standing today, challenge us to see collapse in a new dimension. Here was a city that survived the sword, but could not survive its own irrelevance. Its story reminds us that a capital can be defeated not only by armies, but by a change in the map, a rerouting of the world's economic currents that leaves a once vital crossroads echoing with nothing but the desert wind. Copán was a city of scribes and stargazers. In the lush valley of western Honduras, this Maya capital distinguished itself not through sheer military might, but through intellectual and artistic brilliance. Its sculptors produced some of the most intricate stonework in the ancient Americas, weaving complex mythology and royal history into towering stelae and ornate temple facades. Its astronomers tracked the cycles of Venus with astonishing accuracy, and its scribes maintained one of the most detailed dynastic records known to us, a royal lineage carved in stone that spans over 400 years. This very precision in record-keeping gives Copán a unique voice in our investigation, allowing us to trace its final century not through guesswork, but through the words its own rulers left behind. The story they tell is one of accelerating strain. The final king to erect a monument was a ruler named Yucatuk, who came to power in 822. His reign began not with a celebration, but in a period of severe political instability, hinted at in the fragmented records of his predecessors. After his monuments were completed, something profound happened. The carving of royal stelae, the very heartbeat of Maya political and cosmic order, simply stopped. The silence in the stone is deafening. This was not a sudden invasion or a natural disaster, but a deliberate end to a centuries-old tradition. What could cause a society to stop telling its own story? The evidence points to a failure that began at the very top. The ruling elite of Copán, like those at Tikal, derived their power from a sacred contract. They were the intermediaries between the people and the gods, responsible for ensuring agricultural fertility through ritual and cosmic alignment. When a prolonged drought gripped the region, as climate data confirms it did, that contract was broken. No amount of royal ceremony could make the rains return. The king's spiritual authority, and by extension the entire political hierarchy's reason for being, evaporated. This is what scholars call a top-down collapse. The intricate social pyramid, held together by shared belief in the ruler's divine role, began to crumble from the apex downward. As the elite lost legitimacy, the social contract that compelled thousands to labor on monumental projects dissolved. The common people, whose taxes and work had sustained the glittering capital, made a pragmatic choice. Archaeological surveys around Copán show a telling pattern. While the grand ceremonial plaza was gradually abandoned, the surrounding countryside saw a resurgence of small, sustainable farmsteads. The population did not vanish, they voted with their feet. They dispersed from the unsustainable center to where life could be more directly managed, leaving the temples, ball courts, and royal palaces to the jungle. Copán's story, therefore, offers a crystal-clear lens on a specific type of ending. It illustrates that a civilization can remain physically intact while its core ideology shatters. The stones did not topple from an earthquake. They were simply left behind when the ideas that gave them meaning could no longer hold a people together. The silence of Copán was a quiet rebellion against a broken social contract, but a capital can also die a death of 1,000 cuts. its decline stretched across eras until its final breath is almost an afterthought. Sardis embodies this prolonged farewell. This was a city of many lives, first as the glittering capital of the Lydian kingdom under the legendary King Croesus, whose name became synonymous with wealth itself. It was here, in the 7th century BCE, that the world's first standardized gold and silver coins were minted, a revolutionary invention that replaced barter and powered a new kind of economy. Sardis did not just have wealth, it invented the very system for measuring and moving it. Later, under Roman rule, it transformed again, becoming a major provincial hub adorned with a monumental gymnasium, a sprawling bath complex, and one of the largest synagogues in the ancient world. Its story is not one of a sudden, dramatic fall, but of a slow, grinding descent over nearly 2,000 years. Earthquakes repeatedly shattered its splendor, most notably a devastating quake in 17 CE that required a massive imperial subsidy from Rome to rebuild. Each recovery took a little more out of the city's vitality. As the Byzantine Empire struggled, Sardis, now a fortified town rather than a great capital, shrank in importance and population. Its final end came not from a complex internal failure, but from a blunt external force, the conquest and sacking by the Timurid army in 1402. Yet, even this violent event feels less like a singular catastrophe, and more like the period at the end of a very long, fading sentence. Sardis presents a profound challenge to any theory that seeks a neat, single-cause explanation for collapse. Here, resilience itself became a form of attrition. The city survived the fall of the Lydian kingdom, the transition to Persian rule, the Hellenistic period, Roman annexation, and early Byzantine upheaval. It adapted, rebuilt, and persisted, but each cycle left it a little smaller, a little less central. Its original reason for being as a royal capital and economic innovator long since forgotten. Its ultimate abandonment asks us to consider collapse not as an event, but as a process of cumulative exhaustion, where a place's ability to bounce back is slowly worn down by the relentless passage of time, disaster, and shifting political tides. The ruins of Sardis whisper that sometimes the greatest mystery is not why a city fell, but how it managed to stand for so long against the accumulating weight of history. Deep in the rainforest, a different kind of Maya power was waiting to be seen. Calakmul, the capital of the Khan or Snake Kingdom, was Tikal's shadowy nemesis for centuries, a superpower so vast its true scale remained hidden until modern eyes could peer through the canopy. Recent LiDAR surveys have revealed a staggering truth. Calakmul was not just a city, it was an immense, low-density urban sprawl, likely one of the largest Maya settlements ever built, supporting a population that may have rivaled Tikal's at its peak. This discovery transforms it from a mysterious rival into the central player in a high-stakes, centuries-long struggle for dominance of the Maya world. Its story is the classic Maya collapse writ large, but with a chilling twist, it shows how the very ambition to rule can become the engine of a society's undoing. The stone monuments of Calakmul and Tikal tell a story not of open, constant warfare, but of a protracted Cold War. They traded victories in a slow, grinding conflict of alliances, intercepted trade routes, and ritual humiliations. This long rivalry demanded constant investment, not just in soldiers but in the loyalty of vassal states, the construction of defensive works, and the lavish displays of royal power needed to project strength. The resources of the entire kingdom were funneled into maintaining this geopolitical standoff, a monumental and unending drain. Meanwhile, the environment, that other great player in the Maya drama, was shifting beneath their feet. Calakmul, for all its grandeur, sat in a region particularly vulnerable to drought. Its massive population depended on a fragile system of reservoirs and managed wetlands. When the long dry spells came, as climate records confirm they did in the 9th century, the city's water reserves would have been strained to the breaking point. This is where the deadly synergy begins. The state, already stretched thin by the costs of its rivalry, had fewer resources and less labor to devote to adapting its water management systems. Every able-bodied person conscripted to build a new defensive wall was not available to dig or maintain a crucial reservoir. The political need to project invincibility to Tikal and its allies may have even prevented the rulers from acknowledging the scale of the environmental crisis, lest it be seen as a sign of divine disfavor or weakness. Calakmul's abandonment, therefore, is a masterclass in a specific kind of failure, one where external competition fatally compromises a society's ability to respond to internal, environmental threats. The city did not fall because it lost a war. It emptied because winning the long game against Tikal required a level of investment that left it brittle and unable to cope when the rains failed. Its silent pyramids stand as a monument to a tragic miscalculation, a reminder that in the contest for supremacy, sometimes the greatest enemy is the cost of the contest itself. Ani's churches once pierced the sky like a forest of stone spires. On a remote, windswept plateau that now straddles a modern border, this medieval Armenian capital earned a title that was only a slight exaggeration: the city of 1,001 churches. At its zenith under the Bagratid dynasty in the 10th and 11th centuries, Ani was a metropolis of staggering beauty and wealth, a crucial hub on the Silk Road where the caravans of Asia and Europe converged. Its architects perfected a distinct style, using warm, volcanic stone to create soaring domes and intricate carved facades that blended Byzantine grandeur with local ingenuity. This was a city built to proclaim the glory of both God and commerce, its spiritual and economic power visibly intertwined. Its eventual silence, therefore, is a textbook study in how a great capital can be dismantled not by one foe, but by a relentless sequence of them. The first major blow was political, the conquest by the Byzantine Empire in 1045, which stripped Ani of its status as an independent royal capital. Yet the city remained a populous and prosperous center under new rulers. The deeper unraveling began with a shift in the very geography of trade. Over the following centuries, the primary Silk Road routes gradually migrated south, bypassing Ani's plateau entirely. The economic lifeblood that had fueled its construction and cosmopolitan life slowly drained away. Then came the earth itself. A devastating earthquake in 1319 shattered the city's architectural marvels, toppling walls and collapsing the very churches that were its heart and identity. In the aftermath, without the wealth or concentrated labor force to rebuild on such a scale, the damage became permanent. Later conquests, including by the Mongols, introduced further periods of instability, but they were often just managing a decline already in motion. Ani's haunting, empty cathedral, standing alone against the plateau's fierce winds, challenges a core assumption. We often frame history as a contest between human civilizations, but Ani reminds us that the ground beneath our feet is an active participant. Its fate was a cascade where economic obsolescence made it vulnerable, and a natural disaster delivered the blow from which it could not rise. This is not a story of a society failing from within, but of a magnificent capital being slowly erased from the map by the indifferent forces of tectonic shifts and changing commercial tides, a powerful lesson in the multitude of vulnerabilities even the most glorious city must face. The power of a capital can be measured not only in stone, but in the invisible threads of belief that hold a landscape together. At an altitude of over 12,000 feet, where the air is thin and the altiplano stretches toward the sky, Tiwanaku was not merely a city, it was a sacred axis. For centuries, this ceremonial center on the shores of Lake Titicaca served as the spiritual and political heart of a civilization that predated the Inca by hundreds of years. Its influence radiated across the southern Andes, a cultural sphere bound together by shared gods, agricultural cycles, and a profound connection to this specific holy place. The architecture here feels less like construction and more like a form of high-altitude geometry. Enormous stone blocks, some weighing over 100 tons, were quarried miles away, transported across the rugged plateau, and fitted together with a precision that leaves modern engineers in awe, all without the use of mortar. The famous Gateway of the Sun, a single carved block of andesite, depicts a central deity surrounded by winged attendants, a cosmological map frozen in stone. This was a capital built to last an eternity, anchored to a location believed to be the very site of creation. This deep, sacred bond between ideology and place is what makes Tiwanaku's silence so instructive. Its decline, beginning around 1000 CE, coincides with a climatic shift familiar from other stories on our list, a prolonged and severe drought. Lake Titicaca's water level dropped dramatically, shrinking the agricultural lands that depended on its waters and the raised field systems the Tiwanaku had perfected. Crops failed and the economic foundation of the state began to crumble. Yet the puzzle here is not the environmental stress itself, but the response. Why couldn't this sophisticated society simply adapt or move its capital to a more favorable location, as others had done? The answer lies in that sacred geography. Tiwanaku was not just a convenient administrative center, it was the cosmological center of their world. Its temples, its gates, its very alignment with the mountains and the lake were physical manifestations of a covenant between the people and their gods. To abandon Tiwanaku was not a logistical decision, it was a theological impossibility. The authority of the priests and rulers was inextricably linked to their stewardship of this specific spot. When the drought persisted, it did more than wither crops, it shattered the core narrative of the civilization. If the gods had chosen this place, why were they allowing it to fail? The collapse that followed was therefore a quiet fragmentation. Without the centralizing force of a believable sacred authority, the cultural sphere dissolved. Populations did not vanish, they made a pragmatic, if heartbreaking, choice. They dispersed from the grand ceremonial plazas into smaller, scattered communities in nearby valleys, returning to a more localized, resilient way of life that was less dependent on the failing central system. Tiwanaku's empty monoliths standing against the relentless wind teach us a subtle but powerful lesson about vulnerability. A capital can be brought low not just by a shortage of water, but by a drought of meaning. When a civilization's identity is cemented to a single, fragile point on the map, environmental change does not just challenge its survival, it directly attacks its reason for being. The stones remain, but the world they once anchored simply drifted away. The silent stones of Tiwanaku were anchored to a sacred landscape, a place that could not be abandoned without unraveling the world itself. Yet another capital fell silent for the opposite reason, clinging not to a holy site, but to a way of life that became impossible to sustain. On the remote, fjord-carved coast of Greenland, the farmstead of H. stands as a final, poignant postscript. Its ruins are modest, a stone church and a few surrounding buildings, but the story they hold is monumental. This was part of the Norse Eastern settlement, the farthest-flung capital of medieval Europe, a community that represented a bold, centuries-long experiment in transatlantic colonization. And in 1408, within the walls of that small church, history recorded its final act, a wedding. After that, the Norse in Greenland simply vanish from the written record. Their disappearance is not a tale of dramatic conquest, but a slow-motion fading, a classic and deeply instructive mystery of maladaptation. For generations, the popular theory pointed to conflict with the indigenous Inuit people, a narrative of clashing cultures. Modern archaeology, however, paints a far more complex and revealing picture. the evidence at H-Valsey and other Norse sites shows no signs of a violent end, no burned longhouses or mass memorial sites. Instead, the story is written in subtle, environmental clues. The primary culprit was a changing climate. The onset of the Little Ice Age, a period of global cooling, made Greenland's already marginal environment brutally harsh. Growing seasons shortened, pastures failed, and the sea ice that was crucial for trade and communication with Iceland and Norway became more treacherous and unpredictable. This climatic shift was a direct assault on the Norse way of life, which was fundamentally an attempt to replicate the pastoral farming society of their Scandinavian homeland on the edge of the Arctic. Their economic model also collapsed from a distance. The Norse Greenlanders' main export was walrus ivory, a valuable commodity in medieval Europe, but as trade routes expanded, cheaper and more accessible elephant ivory from Africa began to flood the European market. Their unique product, and thus their economic lifeline to the homeland, lost its value. They were becoming isolated and impoverished, yet perhaps the most fascinating factor was a profound cultural inflexibility. Living alongside them were the Inuit, who thrived in the very conditions that were crippling the Norse. The Inuit were masters of the Arctic environment, expert hunters of seal and whale from kayaks, using tools and techniques perfectly adapted to the ice and sea. The Norse, however, maintained their identity as cattle farmers and parishioners of the European Church. There is little archaeological evidence they adopted Inuit hunting methods, clothing, or technologies that could have saved them. Their social structure and cultural identity, the very things that defined them as a community, became a trap. H-Valsey's last wedding, therefore, is a haunting symbol. It represents a society carrying on its traditions right up to the edge of oblivion, unable or unwilling to transform itself when the world around it demanded change. Their collapse was not sudden, but a gradual starving out, a capital that failed because it could not reimagine what a successful life in that landscape might look like. The stones of the church ask us a difficult question: how tightly should we hold to who we are when survival might require becoming something new? Carroll redefines the very beginning of the American story. In the arid Soup Valley of Peru, this sprawling complex of monumental pyramids and sunken circular plazas was already ancient when the first stones of the Egyptian pyramids were being laid. Flourishing nearly 5,000 years ago, Carroll is the oldest known urban center in the Americas, a cradle of civilization that emerged in stunning isolation. Its design reveals a sophisticated, peaceful society, one that built grand ceremonial platforms and residential districts but left behind no fortifications, no storehouses of weapons, and no art depicting warfare. This was a capital built for ceremony, astronomy, and community, a testament to the human impulse to come together and build something greater. Its quiet abandonment, centuries before the rise of later Andean empires, presents a unique kind of mystery. Because it is so ancient, the trail of clues is faint, and the absence of clear signs makes its end all the more puzzling. There is no evidence of a violent invasion or a sudden, catastrophic disaster. Instead, the city seems to have been gradually, deliberately left behind, its pyramids slowly reclaimed by the desert sands. So what could cause a people to walk away from the very heart of their world, a place they had invested generations to build? Researchers looking at the surrounding landscape point to a familiar, powerful force, the El Niño weather phenomenon. Carroll's agriculture depended on a delicate balance, using irrigation canals to channel water from the nearby Soup River to their fields of cotton, squash, and beans. A major shift in the El Niño cycle, bringing either devastating floods that could wash away their canals or prolonged droughts that would starve them, could have shattered that balance. Yet even this environmental stress may not be the full answer. The abandonment appears to have been a slow process, suggesting a social or spiritual dimension. The centralized authority that organized the construction of those massive pyramids may have gradually weakened, perhaps as the religious ideas that justified such colossal projects lost their hold on the population. People may have simply chosen to disperse into smaller, more manageable communities, taking their cultural knowledge with them but leaving the grand stage empty. Carroll's profound silence challenges our theories of collapse by pushing them back to the very dawn of urban life. It forces us to ask a foundational question: did these first experiments in city living contain within them the seeds of their own transformation? Perhaps for Carroll, what we call collapse was not an ending, but simply the next step in a long human journey, a community outgrowing its first magnificent home and moving on to write the next chapter elsewhere, leaving its original blueprint to be rediscovered millennia later. Gordian was a city defined by a legend, the place where an intricate knot secured an ancient wagon to a post, prophesied that whoever could untie it would rule all of Asia. When Alexander the Great famously sliced through it with his sword, he was not just solving a puzzle, he was performing a symbolic act of conquest that perfectly captures the city's long history. As the capital of the Phrygian kingdom, Gordian's wealth was legendary, tied to the mythical King Midas and his fabled golden touch. In reality, its prosperity came from its position, a vital crossroads controlling trade routes across the Anatolian plateau. This made it a prize for every rising empire, passing from Phrygian to Persian, then to Alexander's Hellenistic successors, and finally into the vast bureaucracy of Rome. With each transition, Gordian adapted, but something subtle was being lost. Its ultimate fate was not a dramatic cut, but a slow unraveling. There was no great battle at its gates, no earthquake that toppled its walls. Instead, the city experienced a quiet, centuries-long fade into obscurity during the late Roman era. The empire's administrative focus shifted to newer, more strategically vital centers, and the major highways of commerce were gradually rerouted. Gordian, once a capital, became a provincial town, then a village, and then was largely forgotten. This is a story of administrative collapse, a process so gradual it is almost invisible in the archaeological record. It challenges our search for a single, catastrophic moment. Gordian did not fall, it was simply bypassed. Its relevance was tied to a specific geopolitical and economic map, and when that map was redrawn by larger imperial powers, the city lost its reason for being. This type of ending is one of the most common, yet least dramatic, fates for a regional capital. It asks us to consider a powerful idea that a city can die not from a blow, but from being forgotten by the very currents of history it once helped to direct. The stones of Gordian, overshadowed by the myth of the knot, whisper a quieter truth about the fragility of importance in a changing world. The Tak Kasra arch still frames the desert sky, a single, breathtaking curve of brick that once formed part of the largest vaulted hall in the ancient world. This was the throne room of Ctesiphon, the winter capital of the Sasanian Empire, and for centuries it was the glittering symbol of a civilization that stood toe-to-toe with Rome and Byzantium. The empire it represented was a realm of immense sophistication, with a centralized bureaucracy, a state-sponsored religion of Zoroastrianism, and a network of cities and trade routes that stretched from the Mediterranean to India. Its rivalry with Constantinople was not just military, but a clash of ideologies and imperial visions, a grand contest between East and West. The decisive end to that contest arrived in the 7th century with the swift and stunning victories of the Arab-Muslim conquest. On the surface, the story seems straightforward. A powerful army defeats another and claims its capital. Yet Ctesiphon's true fate reveals a far more intricate process of transformation, one where military victory was just the first step in a deliberate reordering of the world. The conquering forces did not simply occupy the magnificent palace complex, they made a profound strategic choice. They left it behind, within a generation, the new Arab rulers founded an entirely new capital just upriver, the legendary city of Baghdad. This was not an accident of history, but a conscious act of political engineering. By building Baghdad, the new caliphate was doing more than establishing a fresh administrative center. It was creating a clean slate, a city unburdened by the old Sasanian power structures and symbolic architecture. It shifted the very axis of power, drawing talent, trade, and political gravity toward the new foundation. Ctesiphon, for all its grandeur, was rendered administratively and ideologically obsolete overnight. Its magnificent arch became not a seat of power, but a monument to a superseded past, left standing as the city around it slowly faded into a source of building materials for the ascendant metropolis nearby. This story challenges the classic image of a capital sacked and left in ruins. Here, the collapse was not of stone and mortar, but of relevance. A conquering power can achieve a more complete and lasting victory, not by erasing a rival's capital, but by making it a historical footnote, by redirecting the flow of history itself so that it simply flows around the old center, leaving it silent and still. The Arch of Ctesiphon, therefore, stands as a powerful lesson in the symbolic dimensions of power, a reminder that sometimes the most effective way to end an empire is not to destroy its heart, but to convince the world to build a new one. Merv's story begins with water flowing silently beneath the desert. In the heart of the Karakum Desert, this was not just a city, but a miracle of sustained life, an oasis capital that grew to become one of the largest metropolises on Earth by the 12th century. Its secret was the Qanat, a network of gently sloping underground tunnels that tapped into distant mountain aquifers, delivering a steady, cool flow of water to the surface without a single drop lost to the fierce desert sun. This ancient technology turned the sands into lush gardens and fields, supporting a population of perhaps 500,000 people, a center of scholarship, trade, and staggering wealth where the caravans of the Silk Road converged. Merv was a queen of the sands, and like many great capitals, it knew adversity. It had been conquered before by Arabs, by Seljuk Turks, and each time the city had absorbed the shock, rebuilt, and risen again. Its resilience was woven into the very fabric of its being, sustained by that hidden, life-giving network beneath the ground. Then, in 1221, the Mongol army arrived at its gates. The historical accounts of what followed are stark, speaking of a siege and a surrender followed by a devastating loss of life. This event is often presented as the singular, brutal end of a great city. Yet if military destruction alone were the answer, Merv's history tells us it should have recovered, as it always had. The true mystery and the lesson it holds is why this time was different. Why did the queen of the oasis never rise from her knees? The pivotal clue lies not in the fate of the people, but in the fate of the water. The Mongols, under the command of Tolui, son of Genghis Khan, were masters of a chillingly strategic form of warfare. They understood that to break a region permanently, you must break its capacity to sustain life itself. Historical sources and the archaeological record suggest they did not merely breach the city walls, they systematically sought out and destroyed the Qanat system. These tunnels, which had taken centuries to dig and maintain, were deliberately collapsed or poisoned. It was an act of infrastructural assassination. The agricultural base that had fed the metropolis for a millennium was rendered useless in a matter of weeks. This transforms the story from a tragic historical event into a profound case study. Merv's final collapse demonstrates that a society can survive the loss of its buildings, its art, even a significant portion of its population, if its fundamental ecological engine remains intact. But when the conqueror's strategy shifts from claiming wealth to erasing the very means of production, recovery becomes impossible. The city did not fade due to a loss of spirit or will. It became a geographical ghost town because the delicate, invisible technology that made it possible was unmade. The empty ruins of Merv, standing in the desert silence, challenge us to look beyond the drama of battle to the deeper vulnerabilities of civilization. They ask us to consider what truly holds a place together and how, with terrible precision, that bond can be permanently severed. The logistical miracle of Merv's underground rivers was an act of sustained engineering. But on the other side of the world, another capital performed a different kind of magic, conjuring its foundations from the sea itself. Nan Madol rises from the turquoise waters of the Pacific, a ghostly grid of stone walls and canals built not on solid land but on a coral reef. This is the Venice of the Pacific, a city of over 90 artificial islets constructed from colossal basalt logs, some weighing up to 50 tons. To stand here is to witness a puzzle of almost superhuman ambition. How, and more importantly why, would a people undertake such a backbreaking task, moving millions of tons of rock across water to create a capital where none could naturally exist? The answer lies in the nature of power. Nan Madol was the ceremonial and political heart of the Sordelor dynasty, a line of rulers who unified the island of Pohnpei. By building their seat of power on a separate, artificial landscape, they created a physical manifestation of their authority, a place set apart and elevated, literally and figuratively, from the common people. The canals served as moats, controlling access and turning the city into a fortress of prestige and ritual. The scale of labor required to maintain this separation tells us everything about the society's concentration of power. For generations, the system held. Then, around 1628, the city was abandoned. The oral histories of Pohnpei provide a dramatic explanation, a legend of social revolt. They tell of the increasing tyranny of the Sordelors, whose demands for tribute grew so oppressive that a hero named Isoclekal rose to lead a rebellion, overthrowing the dynasty and scattering its priesthood. This is a classic narrative of a top-heavy regime toppled by the people it exploited. Yet, as with so many of our capitals, the full story is etched in more than just legend. Archaeology suggests the glittering city on the water may have been crumbling from within long before the final revolt. The very act of sustaining the elite in such an isolated, resource-limited environment placed an incredible strain on the island. Feeding the rulers, artisans, and laborers who did not farm required constant tribute from the surrounding communities, likely in the form of breadfruit, yams, and fish. Over generations, this demand may have led to the overharvesting of key resources, subtly degrading the ecological balance that supported the entire society. Furthermore, maintaining those artificial islets against the relentless power of the ocean and tropical storms would have been a never-ending drain on labor. The legend of tyranny, then, might be the cultural memory of a tipping point, when the environmental and economic costs of maintaining the capital's grandeur finally outweighed the perceived benefits of the central authority. The social contract shattered. The people may not have just rejected a cruel king, they may have rejected an entire system that had become unsustainable. Nan Madol, therefore, offers a uniquely Pacific lens on collapse. In an island world of finite resources and profound isolation, the margin for error is razor-thin. A monumental project like this represents an enormous gamble, a massive investment of social capital in a symbol of power. Its silent canals now ask us a haunting question: what happens when the symbol becomes too expensive to keep alive, and the people who built it finally decide to stop paying the price? The glittering halls of Persepolis were built to inspire awe, not for war. High on a stone terrace carved from a mountainside, this was the ceremonial heart of the Achaemenid Persian Empire, a place where subject nations came to offer tribute during the Grand New Year festival. Its architecture was a masterpiece of imperial messaging, with sculpted staircases depicting a vast, orderly procession of peoples from across the empire, all bringing gifts to the King of Kings. This was not a fortress but a stage, designed to project an image of eternal, benevolent power and unity across a realm that stretched from India to Egypt. Its destruction, therefore, was not a military necessity but a calculated performance. When Alexander the Great's army arrived in 330 BCE, they did not merely sack the city. After taking its vast treasury, Alexander allowed his troops to loot the palaces, and a fire, likely set at his command, consumed the great audience hall and the treasury. This was an act of political theater, a deliberate and symbolic unmasking. By burning the grand stage of Persian imperial authority, Alexander was demonstrating to the world that the old order was literally going up in smoke, that its power was an illusion he could shatter. On the surface, this seems like the ultimate collapse, the definitive end of a capital and the empire it represented. Yet here lies the profound nuance of Persepolis. Its fiery end did not mean the end of Persian civilization. Alexander, after his symbolic victory, went on to adopt many Persian customs of governance. Persian administrators kept the bureaucracy running, Persian artistic styles influenced later cultures, and the region remained a vital center under the Seleucid and later Parthian empires. The society, the language, the deep cultural structures, they persisted. This forces us to make a critical distinction that echoes through many stories on our list. Persepolis challenges us to separate the collapse of a specific capital as a political symbol from the collapse of an entire civilization. A conquering power can engineer the fall of a regime by destroying its most potent emblem, its ceremonial heart. But the people, their knowledge, their ways of life are far more resilient. They flow into new channels, adapting to new rulers and new symbols, while the old capital stands as a blackened monument to a very specific kind of ending, the end of a particular idea of power. The silent, fire-scarred columns of Persepolis ask us to look beyond the dramatic act of destruction to the quieter, more enduring story of cultural continuity that often flows right past the ruins. La Ciudad Perdida is a city of stairways to the sky. High in the cloud forests of Colombia's Sierra Nevada, its 2,000 stone steps ascend through the jungle, connecting terraced plazas and circular ceremonial spaces that seem to float among the trees. Built by the Tairona people around 800 CE, this was a sophisticated urban and spiritual hub centuries before the Inca shaped Machu Picchu. Its network of paved roads and drainage channels speaks of a society deeply integrated with this vertical landscape, a capital that worked with the mountain rather than conquering it. The conventional story of its end ties neatly to the arrival of Spanish conquistadors in the 16th century, a tale of conflict and devastating illness introduced from abroad. Yet the stones of the lost city tell a more nuanced story, one not of a sudden, violent erasure, but of a deliberate and strategic fade. While European contact undoubtedly brought immense hardship, archaeological evidence does not point to a single, catastrophic battle or epidemic that emptied the city in a season. Instead, the pattern suggests a gradual process of depopulation, a slow dispersal over generations. Faced with the relentless pressure of colonization, the Tairona and their descendants, the Kogi, Wiwa, Arhuaco, and Kankumo peoples, made a profound choice. They began to migrate deeper into the most remote reaches of the Sierra Nevada, leaving their grand stone plazas to be reclaimed by roots and vines. This was not a surrender, but a strategic retreat, a form of resilience enacted on a civilizational scale. They chose cultural survival over holding a fixed point on a map. By dissolving their visible capital into the landscape, they preserved the invisible core of their knowledge, spirituality, and social structure. La Ciudad Perdida, therefore, challenges our very definition of collapse in the face of an overwhelming external threat. It presents abandonment not as a failure, but as a successful long-term strategy. The city was not lost to its builders, it was relinquished. Its silent terraces stand as a testament to a people who prioritized the continuity of their way of life over the permanence of their monuments. a powerful reminder that sometimes walking away from stone is the surest way to keep a culture alive. The legend of Akkad is written not in stone, but in the empty space between lines of ancient text. This was the capital of history's first true empire, forged by the ambitious Sargon of Akkad around 2300 BCE, a ruler who boasted of uniting the warring city-states of Mesopotamia under a single, unprecedented authority. His domain stretched from the Persian Gulf to the Mediterranean, a feat of political and military organization that set a template for every empire that followed. Yet today, a profound irony hangs over this foundational achievement. The physical heart of this world-altering project, the city of Akkad itself, has vanished. Its location has never been definitively found, lost somewhere beneath the silt of the Tigris and Euphrates plains. This makes Akkad a double mystery, a capital whose fall is shrouded in legend and whose very ground is a historical ghost. The empire's dissolution around 2150 BCE is attributed to a familiar constellation of pressures. Cuneiform tablets speak of a great drought, a climatic shift toward aridity that would have devastated the agricultural surplus that fed the imperial bureaucracy and army. Economic networks frayed, and from the eastern mountains came invaders referred to as the Gutians, described in later Babylonian texts as a destructive, uncivilized force. Yet these explanations feel frustratingly incomplete, pieced together from fragments written by Akkad's enemies and successors. The city's physical absence forces us to confront a deeper truth about how history is written and unwritten. Without the central node, the capital itself, we lose the primary archaeological witness. We cannot study its grain storage patterns to trace economic decline, examine its fortifications for signs of conflict, or read the layers of its streets for a timeline of abandonment. We are left with second-hand accounts and the silent testimony of outlying towns. This transforms Akkad from a historical event into a powerful metaphor for the fragility of early imperial projects. Its disappearance symbolizes how a revolutionary idea, the concept of a unified multi-ethnic state, could be so precarious that the very center from which it was managed could be erased from the map and memory. Akkad challenges collapse theories in a uniquely philosophical way. It demonstrates that sometimes the most significant loss is not the story of the fall, but the loss of the details that would explain it. We are left with only echoes, a reminder that the first and most vulnerable thing an empire can lose is its own address. Winchester's story is written in parchment and royal writs, not in ash or shattered stone. For centuries, this was the undisputed heart of England, the royal and ecclesiastical capital where Saxon kings like Alfred the Great held court, fortified its walls against Viking raids, and laid plans for a unified kingdom. Its grand cathedral and royal palace were symbols of a power that was both spiritual and temporal, the central node in a growing nation. Its decline, therefore, presents a paradox of success. The capital did not fall to an enemy. It was gently, inexorably made redundant by the very kingdom it helped to create. The pivotal moment was the Norman conquest of 1066, but not in the way one might expect. William the Conqueror did not destroy Winchester. He was crowned there, acknowledging its deep symbolic power. Yet he and his successors also held a keen strategic eye. London, with its mighty river Thames connecting it to the continent and its burgeoning commercial wealth, offered advantages Winchester, nestled inland, could not match. The shift was not a sudden decree, but a slow, administrative tide. Over the next 2 centuries, the royal treasury was gradually moved to London. The court, following the king's business, spent more time there. The focus of trade, law, and political gravity drifted steadily northeast. Winchester remained a wealthy, important regional center, a place of bishops and markets, but the national spotlight had moved on. This is a collapse of status, not of substance. It challenges our entire search for dramatic rupture by presenting a different model: administrative obsolescence. Here, a capital fades because the logic of the state evolves. Centralized kingdoms require efficient hubs, and geography is a relentless master. A location better suited for collecting taxes, mustering armies, and engaging with international commerce will inevitably draw power from a place of older, more traditional prestige. Winchester's quiet transition from national capital to historic cathedral city asks us to reconsider what we mean by abandonment. The people never left, the buildings were not ruined, but its primary function as the nerve center of a nation was surgically transferred. Its story proves that a capital can be most completely defeated not by a siege, but by a ledger, by the quiet, bureaucratic decisions that redirect the flow of power to a more convenient location on the map. The legend of the Minotaur was born from the stones of Knossos. This was not a fortress, but a sprawling, multi-story palace complex, a labyrinth of brightly frescoed corridors, storerooms, and grand ceremonial courtyards that served as the vibrant heart of Minoan Crete. For centuries, this civilization ruled not through armies, but through the sea, a thalassocracy whose ships and cultural influence stretched across the Aegean, creating a network of trade and ideas long before classical Greece. The palace itself, with its intricate layout and lack of defensive walls, seemed to symbolize a confident, peaceful power rooted in commerce and ritual. Its sudden silence around 1450 BCE has long been one of history's most dramatic whodunits, with a prime suspect ready-made: the cataclysmic volcanic eruption of Thera, the island we now call Santorini. The scale of that event is almost beyond comprehension, a blast that may have been many times more powerful than Krakatoa, sending tsunamis racing across the sea to batter the northern coasts of Crete. It is a compelling narrative, a civilization literally washed away by the fury of nature. Yet, as with so many capitals on our journey, the evidence at Knossos complicates this clean, catastrophic story. Modern scientific dating suggests the Thera eruption likely occurred a generation or two earlier, perhaps around 1600 BCE. While this would have been a staggering blow, crippling ports and disrupting the maritime trade that was the Minoan lifeblood, it did not immediately erase the palace. Knossos shows signs of rebuilding and continued use after the disaster. This forces us to look beyond the volcano for the final act. The palace's ultimate end coincides with a profound cultural shift. The elegant Minoan art and the unique linear script still undeciphered vanish from the record. In their place appears a new administrative script, Linear B, an early form of Greek used by the Mycenaeans from the mainland. The architecture changes too, with new fortifications and warrior graves appearing. The story written in these silent clues is not one of a single knockout punch, but of a staggered collapse. The Thera eruption was likely the critical destabilizing blow, a shockwave that shattered the economic and perhaps ideological confidence of the Minoan elite, leaving their society vulnerable. In that window of weakness, the opportunistic, warlike Mycenaeans from mainland Greece appear to have moved in, not as barbarian destroyers, but as a new managerial class, taking over the administrative apparatus of the weakened palace. Knossos, therefore, presents a masterful case study in the layered nature of collapse. Here, a natural disaster of epic proportions did not deliver the final blow itself, but it created the perfect conditions for a political and cultural takeover. The capital did not simply drown, it was transformed from within, its labyrinthine halls eventually falling silent not under waves of water, but under the slow tide of a new language, a new ruling class, and a new way of life. The myth of the Minotaur, a hybrid creature defeated by an outsider, feels less like fantasy and more like a profound cultural memory of this very transition, a civilization's haunting metaphor for its own complex and layered end. Gallipoli was a fortress built for a single, piercing purpose: perched on the narrow throat of the Dardanelles Strait. This was the Ottoman Empire's first permanent foothold in Europe, captured in 1354. It became more than a military outpost. It was a forward capital, the primary naval base and staging ground for the empire's relentless push into the Balkans. From its docks, the Ottoman fleet controlled the vital waterway linking the Black Sea to the Mediterranean, a strategic chokehold of immense power. Its importance was absolute, the essential bridgehead for a burgeoning empire. Yet this very success contained the seeds of its own obsolescence. As Ottoman armies marched deeper into Europe, the frontier of their ambition rapidly moved westward. The sultans needed a command center closer to the new heart of their expanding domains. First, the capital shifted to Edirne, a city now firmly within conquered territory. Then came the ultimate prize, the ancient city of Constantinople, which fell to Mehmed II in 1453. With that conquest, the Ottoman Empire claimed not just a city, but an imperial legacy. Constantinople, renamed Istanbul, was geographically central, magnificently defensible, and imbued with centuries of symbolic power as the seat of the vanquished Byzantine Empire. Overnight, Gallipoli transformed from a vital spearhead into a distant rear guard. Its strategic value did not evaporate, but its political significance did. The capital had leapfrogged over it, leaving it as a still important naval station, but one far from the halls of power. This is a story of abandonment through triumph, a phenomenon we might call capital succession. Gallipoli did not fall to an enemy, fade from drought, or revolt against its rulers. It was rendered administratively redundant by the empire's own spectacular growth. The fortress city fulfilled its purpose so completely that it made itself unnecessary as a center of gravity. Its quiet eclipse challenges the very notion that a capital's end must be tied to failure. Sometimes the most successful capitals are the ones that work themselves out of a job, their silence a direct result of the larger story they helped to write. The walls of Gallipoli stand not as a monument to collapse, but to a mission accomplished, a stepping stone that was deliberately and successfully left behind. Even the densest jungle can hide an entire civilization. In the remote Mosquitia region of Honduras, a place so thick with vegetation it was long considered impenetrable, a modern discovery has rewritten a chapter of pre-Columbian history. Here, using advanced LiDAR technology to see through the canopy, researchers confirmed the existence of extensive ruins, a sprawling settlement often linked to the legendary Ciudad Blanca, the White City or City of the Monkey God. This is not a historically documented capital with a known name or dynasty, but its scale and sophistication suggest it was the heart of a significant, previously unknown society. Its silent plazas and earthen pyramids represent a mystery that only modern science could uncover, a capital that had vanished so completely it became myth. The site's profound isolation adds a unique layer to its story. Unlike many cities on our list, there is no evidence it ever faced an invading army or the pressures of colonial contact. The artifacts found, including finely carved stone vessels and ceremonial seats, were left in place as if the inhabitants simply walked away and never returned. This points to an abandonment that was likely peaceful, a coordinated departure rather than a frantic flight. The leading theories point to the quiet, internal pressures we have seen before. Disease could have swept through the population, a health challenge against which they had no defense. Alternatively, environmental shifts, perhaps changes in river courses or local soil exhaustion from centuries of cultivation, may have made sustaining a large community in that specific location untenable. The jungle did not conquer this city, it patiently reclaimed a place its people had already left behind. Ciudad Blanca, therefore, stands as a powerful symbol for our entire exploration. It is a capital whose very existence was a secret until recently, and whose collapse is a blank page in our historical record. Its discovery screams a thrilling reminder that our maps of the human past are still incomplete. There may be dozens more such places, entire capitals and cultures whose rises and falls are stories waiting in the soil, their silent stones holding theories of collapse we have not yet even begun to imagine. From the monumental to the mythical, these 30 stories are not a random collection of ruins. They are a data set, a global archive of human ambition and its limits, written in stone, earth, and empty space. When we step back from each individual mystery and view them as a single panoramic tapestry, a powerful and unifying pattern comes into focus. The dramatic, single-cause collapse, the kind we see in movies, is revealed to be the rare exception. Far more common is the slow, intricate unraveling, a symphony of pressures where no single instrument plays the final note. This pattern is built from 4 recurring themes that echo across continents and millennia. First, we see the deadly dance between environmental stress and social rigidity. A prolonged drought does not merely kill crops, it tests the very ideology of a king who claims control over the rains, as at Tikal or Copán. A society that cannot adapt its core identity, like the Norse in Greenland clinging to cattle farming, finds itself trapped by its own traditions. Second is the peril of economic overspecialization. A capital built on a single trade route like Petra or Ani becomes a ghost town when the map is redrawn. A society that channels all its wealth into maintaining a rivalry, as Calakmul did, has nothing left when the environment shifts. Their entire purpose was tied to a flow of goods or a contest of prestige that the wider world could simply decide to bypass. Third is the profound fragility of ideologies cemented to a single place. For Tiwanaku, the city was the cosmological center of the universe. To abandon it was to unravel reality itself. This sacred geography made them prisoners of their own belief, unable to relocate even when survival demanded it. Finally, we must acknowledge the quiet, often overlooked force of simple geopolitical eclipse. This is not collapse through failure, but through obsolescence. Winchester faded because London was a better tool for a growing kingdom. Gallipoli was left behind because the empire it launched succeeded beyond its wildest dreams. The capital did not fall, it was succeeded. Together, these themes challenge us to fundamentally reframe our vocabulary. We must learn to think in terms of transformation and reorganization, not just catastrophic ends. The people of the Mississippi Valley did not vanish when Cahokia emptied. They dispersed into new social configurations. The citizens of Mohenjo-Daro likely returned to simpler village life. The abandonment of a capital was often not the end of a people, but the start of a different strategy for survival. Resilience, these ruins whisper, is not always about holding the center at all costs. Sometimes it is found in the courage to walk away from a masterpiece that has become a millstone, to scatter like seeds so that the culture itself can find new ground. This panoramic view, drawn from 30 silent witnesses, prepares us for the most important question of all, a question not about the past but about our own future. The ruins we have walked through are more than a chronicle of endings. They form a global library of human trial and error, a record of grand social experiments conducted on the stage of deep time. Each silent capital, from the hydraulic metropolis of Angkor to the scribble city of Copán, offers a case study in the delicate balance required to sustain a complex society. They teach us, above all, that complexity itself is not free. It demands constant payment in energy, attention, and resources. The brilliant water network that fed 1 million people at Angkor was also a fragile system requiring endless maintenance. The divine authority that unified the Maya world became a catastrophic liability when the rains failed. A society's signature achievement, the very source of its power, could over centuries become its most dangerous point of failure. This is perhaps the most humbling lesson etched into these stones, that success often sows the seeds of a specific kind of vulnerability. The patterns defy any simple story. To look at the empty plazas of Tikal and declare it was the drought, or at Hattusa and claim it was the sea peoples, is to miss the profound symphony of causes. These sites collectively rebuke the monocausal explanation. They demand that we listen to a chorus of voices, the climatologist reading tree rings, the economist tracing the flow of obsidian, the epigrapher deciphering a king's propaganda. True understanding emerges only at the intersection of disciplines, where a shift in monsoon winds meets a ledger of trade deficits and a newly carved monument boasting of a hollow victory. This multidisciplinary lens transforms these places from tombs into classrooms, and the curriculum they offer feels unnervingly contemporary. We live in an age of profound interconnection and accelerating environmental change, facing questions of resilience and sustainability on a planetary scale. The abandoned capitals ask us to look in the mirror. What are the foundational systems we depend upon today? The networks of energy, information, and belief that feel as permanent as stone. How robust are they, really, to the shocks we can foresee and those we cannot? The stones do not predict our future, but they illuminate the timeless conditions under which societies thrive or transform. They remind us that resilience is not about permanence, but about adaptability, the capacity to change course before the path disappears entirely. The final, lingering question they leave us with is not about the past, but about the stories we are writing now, and what, if anything, the future might learn from the silent cities we will one day leave behind. The echo of their questions lingers long after we leave their silent plazas. As this exploration of 30 enigmatic capitals draws to a close, we are left not with final answers, but with a profound shift in perspective. The story these ruins tell is not one of definitive ends, but of profound transitions, pivotal moments where a society chose a new path, often at the cost of its most magnificent stage. Their collective silence is a powerful lesson in historical humility, reminding us that the past refuses to be packaged into simple, satisfying narratives of conquest or catastrophe. These were not failures, but transformations, difficult choices etched into the landscape. They stand as dual testaments, celebrating the breathtaking heights of human ingenuity in one breath, and in the next, whispering of its inherent limits when faced with a changing world. The true value of this journey lies in the reflection it sparks within our own time. These places urge us to consider the eternal human quest for balance, the delicate dance between soaring ambition and long-term sustainability, between the concentrated power of a great capital and the distributed resilience of a flexible, adaptable people. Each empty city is a mirror, asking us to look at the foundations of our own societies. Which of these mysteries lingers most in your mind? Was it the calculated withdrawal from Hattusa, the spiritual rupture at Copán, or the strategic fade of the lost city? Share your thoughts in the comments below and let the conversation continue. If you found this journey through the echoes of fallen capitals thought-provoking, be sure to subscribe and tap the notification bell for more deep dives into the enduring puzzles of our shared past. The stones may be silent, but their questions are designed to resonate through the ages, challenging us to listen more closely to the stories we tell about ourselves.